Cheese and tomato.
Wow. Anything on that, or just the cheese and the tomato when we're done?
No, cheese and tomato's fine.
What kind of bread?
I'm a plain guy.
What kind of bread are we talking?
Look, you'll see. What plain? Whole wheat bread.
For 78 years, Elton John has lived a life painted in the brightest colors imaginable. From sold-out stadiums to glittering award ceremonies, from chart-topping hits that defined generations to unforgettable performances that brought millions to tears, he has been one of the most celebrated artists in music history. But beneath all that sparkle and success, beneath the flamboyant costumes and legendary showmanship, there's always been a quieter story. A story about love, identity, and the courage it takes to be honest with yourself when the whole world is watching. And now, at 78, Elton John has finally opened up about a woman he loved deeply, a woman he could never publicly acknowledge during a time when doing so might have cost him everything he had worked for. This is not just another celebrity revelation. This is a window into a different era, a time when being true to yourself could destroy your career, alienate your family, and leave you isolated in ways that are hard to imagine today. This is about understanding the journey of a man who became a global icon while struggling with his own truth, and about the people who shaped that journey in ways the public never knew. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let me set the scene. It's the early 1970s, and Elton John is on the verge of becoming one of the biggest names in music. His partnership with lyricist Bernie Taupin has already produced some unforgettable songs, and his star is rising faster than anyone could have predicted. But in those days, the music industry and society at large were very different places. Being openly gay wasn't just frowned upon, it was considered career suicide, especially for someone who wanted to reach the massive mainstream audience that Elton was beginning to captivate. During this pivotal time in his life, there was indeed a woman who played a significant role in Elton's world. Her name was Linda Woodrow, and their relationship represents one of the most complex and misunderstood chapters of his early years. Linda wasn't just a casual acquaintance or a brief romance. She was someone Elton genuinely cared about, someone he tried to build a future with at a time when he was still figuring out who he truly was. Elton and Linda met in the late 1960s, before the fame, before the sold-out concerts, before Elton John became a household name. Back then, he was still Reginald Kenneth Dwight, a talented young musician trying to make it in the cutthroat London music scene. Linda came from a well-to-do family, and by all accounts, she was intelligent, beautiful, and supportive of Elton's musical ambitions. They moved in together, and for a while, it seemed like they were heading toward a traditional life together. In fact, they even got engaged. But here's where the story gets complicated, and this is what Elton has finally been willing to talk about more openly in recent years. He cared about Linda. He really did. She wasn't just a cover or a convenient arrangement. There was genuine affection there, genuine friendship, and a real desire to make things work. But deep down, Elton was struggling with something he couldn't fully articulate, even to himself. He was trying to fit into a mold that society expected of him, trying to be the person everyone thought he should be, but the truth kept pressing against the walls he had built around it. The engagement to Linda eventually fell apart, and it happened in a way that was painful for everyone involved. Elton has spoken about how he attempted suicide during this period, overcome by confusion, pressure, and the weight of hiding his true self. It was Bernie Taupin, his writing partner and closest friend, who found him and quite literally saved his life. That moment became a turning point, not just in Elton's personal journey, but in his artistic one as well. So why couldn't Elton tell anyone about Linda in the way he wanted to? Why has it taken decades for him to speak openly about this relationship and what it meant? The answer is layered and deeply human. First, there's the obvious fact that discussing Linda meant discussing a time when Elton was deeply conflicted about his sexuality. In the years after their breakup, as Elton came to understand and accept that he was gay, talking about Linda risked being misunderstood. People might see her as proof that he wasn't really gay, or they might dismiss his relationship with her as meaningless, neither of which would be fair or accurate. But there's something else too, something more tender. Elton loved Linda in his own way, even if it wasn't the romantic love she deserved or wanted. He tried to make it work because he genuinely cared about her happiness and because, at that moment in his life, he desperately wanted to be normal, to fit in, to make his mother proud and avoid the judgment he knew would come if he lived his truth. Talking about Linda meant admitting that he had, in some sense, hurt her by not being able to give her what she needed. It meant acknowledging a painful chapter where his own confusion caused pain to someone who didn't deserve it. For years, Elton kept this part of his story relatively private, not because he was ashamed of Linda, but because he was still processing what it all meant. How do you explain to the world that you loved someone but not in the way they needed? How do you honor a relationship that was real and meaningful while also being honest about why it couldn't work? These are questions without easy answers, and Elton has spent much of his life wrestling with them. As the decades passed, Elton's life took many turns. He came out as bisexual in 1976 and later identified as gay. He struggled with addiction and emotional turmoil throughout the 1980s and early 1990s. He faced a devastating loss of friends to AIDS, including his dear friend Ryan White, whose death profoundly affected him. He eventually found sobriety, rebuilt his life, and ultimately found lasting love with David Furnish, whom he married and with whom he has built a beautiful family. But through all of those chapters, through all the growth and change, the question of his early relationships lingered. Linda Woodrow, in particular, remained a figure that represented a complicated truth about Elton's journey. She was part of his story in a way that couldn't be erased or ignored, but also couldn't be easily explained without context and nuance. Now, in his late 70s, after a farewell tour that spanned years and took him around the world one last time, after writing his memoir and being the subject of the biographical film Rocket Man, Elton has reached a place where he can look back with clarity and compassion, both for himself and for the people who were part of his journey. He has spoken more openly about Linda and what that relationship meant to him, not to rewrite history or minimize his identity as a gay man, but to acknowledge the full truth of his experience. In recent interviews and in his memoir, Elton has described Linda as someone he genuinely cared for and someone who deserved better than what he could give her at the time. He has talked about how confusing those years were, how much he wanted to be straight because it would have made everything so much easier. He wanted to please his mother, who struggled with his sexuality. He wanted to avoid the judgment and discrimination he knew would come. And he wanted, on some level, to experience the kind of conventional happiness that seemed so simple for everyone else. But wanting something doesn't make it true, and trying to be someone you're not only leads to heartbreak for everyone involved. Elton couldn't be the husband Linda needed because he wasn't attracted to women in the way a husband should be. No amount of caring, no amount of trying, could change that fundamental truth. And living in denial of it nearly destroyed him. What makes this story so powerful is how universal it is, even though the specifics are unique to Elton's extraordinary life. So many people have struggled with similar questions, especially in generations past when being gay meant facing real danger, rejection, and loss. How many people married someone they cared about but weren't truly attracted to because that's what was expected? How many people lived double lives, trying to be one person in public and another in private, until the weight of it became unbearable? How many people hurt someone they genuinely loved because they couldn't be honest about who they were? Elton's willingness to talk about Linda now, to acknowledge that chapter of his life with honesty and grace, is important for several reasons. First, it shows young LGBTQ people that even their heroes had complicated journeys, that accepting yourself isn't always a straight line from confusion to clarity. It took Elton years to fully understand and embrace his identity, and there were false starts and painful mistakes along the way. That's okay. That's human. Second, it honors Linda and the role she played in his life. By speaking about her respectfully and acknowledging what their relationship meant, Elton is giving her a place in his story that she deserves. She wasn't just a footnote or mistake. She was a real person who loved him and who he tried to love back in the only way he knew how at the time. Third, it highlights how much society has changed and how much further we still need to go. Elton couldn't be open about his sexuality in the early 1970s without risking his career and facing enormous backlash. Today, while LGBTQ people still face discrimination and challenges, there are also legal protections, cultural acceptance in many places, and visible role models who live openly and authentically. Elton himself has been part of creating that change, using his platform to advocate for LGBTQ rights and supporting countless organizations working toward equality. Looking back at his life now, Elton can see how all the pieces fit together. Linda was part of his journey towards self-acceptance, even though their relationship didn't work out. She was there during a time when he was still becoming himself, still figuring out what it meant to be Elton John. The pain of that breakup, the attempted suicide, The realization that he couldn't keep living a lie, all of it pushed him toward the truth that would eventually set him free. It's also worth noting that Elton's story isn't just about Linda. There were other relationships, other moments of confusion and clarity along the way. His first marriage to Renata Bloll in 1984 is another chapter that he has spoken about with regret and understanding. Like Linda, Renata was someone he cared about, someone he tried to build a life with, but ultimately someone he couldn't give what she deserved because he was still not being fully honest with himself. What we're seeing now, at 78, is a man who has made peace with his past, who can look back at the complicated, messy, sometimes painful journey he took to get where he is and see it all as part of a larger story of growth and self-discovery. He is not making excuses for the pain he caused or the mistakes he made. He is simply being honest about what happened and why. And in doing so, is offering a kind of wisdom that only comes from living a full life and having the courage to examine it truthfully. Elton has said in interviews that one of the greatest gifts of getting older is perspective. When you're young and in the middle of confusion and pain, it's hard to see beyond the immediate crisis. But with time and distance, you can start to understand why things happened the way they did, and you can find compassion for your younger self who was doing the best they could with what they knew at the time. This perspective has allowed Elton to talk about Linda and that period of his life without shame or defensiveness. He is not trying to hide it or pretend it didn't happen. He is acknowledging it as part of his truth, as part of the journey that led him to the happiness and authenticity he is today with David and their children. There's something profoundly moving about watching someone who has lived as publicly as Elton John, someone whose life has been documented in songs, interviews, films, and headlines for more than 50 years, still finding new layers of truth to share. It reminds us that we're all constantly evolving, constantly learning more about ourselves, and that it's never too late to be honest about who we are and where we've been. The story of Elton and Linda also serves as a reminder of the real human cost of homophobia and discrimination. When society tells people they can't be who they are, when it forces them to hide and pretend and live in fear, it doesn't just hurt the LGBTQ individuals themselves. It hurts everyone around them. Linda deserved a partner who could love her fully and authentically. Elton deserved the freedom to understand and accept himself without fear. The fact that they couldn't have those things in the early 1970s is a tragedy, even if both of them eventually found happiness in other ways. Today, Elton John is living proof that it's possible to come through confusion, pain, and struggle and find joy on the other side. His marriage to David Furnish has lasted more than 3 decades. They have 2 beautiful sons who are growing up knowing that their fathers love each other and love them. Elton has been sober for over 30 years. He has used his wealth and fame to make a real difference in the world, particularly through the Elton John AIDS Foundation, which has raised hundreds of millions of dollars for HIV AIDS prevention and treatment. But none of that happiness erases the earlier chapters. They are all part of the same story, all part of the journey that made Elton who he is. And by talking about Linda now, by confirming the love he felt for her even though he could never tell anyone the full truth of what that relationship represented, Elton is inviting all of us to see our own complicated journeys with more compassion. We all have relationships that didn't work out, decisions we regret, times when we hurt people we cared about because we weren't being honest with ourselves. That doesn't make us bad people. It makes us human. What matters is whether we learn from those experiences, whether we grow, and whether we eventually find the courage to live authentically, even when it's hard. Elton John's story, including his relationship with Linda Woodrow, is ultimately a story about the power of truth and the healing that comes from accepting yourself. It took him decades to get there. It took pain and loss and hard-won wisdom. But he got there. And in sharing his journey, he's lighting the way for others who might be struggling with their own truth. So there you have it, the story of the woman Elton John loved but could never fully talk about, not because she wasn't important, but because understanding what that relationship meant required understanding his entire journey towards self-acceptance. It's a story about love in all its forms, about the difference between caring for someone and being in love with them, and about the courage it takes to be honest, both with yourself and with the world. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own journey or the journeys of people you love, then I hope you'll take a moment to like this video and share it with others who might need to hear it. And if you want to keep up with more stories like this, stories that go beyond the headlines to explore the real, complicated, beautiful truth of people's lives, then please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, it's never too late to live your truth.